gonna lead to a transition about another guy who also came up in a lot of trade discussions during the offseason. And is he gonna be on this team this year? And he stayed, and like, oh man, like I think he'll get back on track after ending last season poorly. But that's obviously Richaun Holmes, who didn't even see the floor against the Warriors and has just looked terrible,
Yeah,
terrible.
why should he see the floor against the Warriors? He's
Yeah, he's looked lost out there. He
he's it's like it's the weirdest thing because in terms of the ability to switch, which is something you need to do with the Warriors, um, Holmes is like only moderately better than Alex Len, but they're just terrible at that. Domas is just far more engaged and decisive defensively that even not being as athletically gifted, he's better at that. And the Warriors were exploiting it. And they would have done the same thing probably with Holmes. And whether Holmes is getting drawn out, he's underwhelming. Whether he's defending the paint, he's underwhelming. You could see it in that game against the Magic. Um, he just there were just a few times where he didn't even contest the shot, and he's just been completely awful. And it just seems like when you look at the guys who can play the five, obviously Domas is your starter, he's your primary guy. Um, but like Holmes just doesn't like make sense. It's like Alex Len, you're never gonna really use him as a backup five unless like you want to put him up against, like we've said before, like against a Jokic or maybe against a Nurkic or something like that, like a big guy. Um, he could give maybe decent backup minutes, although he's going to have a lot of issues if they start switching, a big 7-footer onto smaller people. That becomes an issue pretty quickly. On the smaller side, you have Chimezi Metu, who against the Warriors in 2 games this season has made the defense better in those games when he's out there. And so, like, obviously, Chimezi Metu's not a backup center, though. Situationally, he's pretty decent. You'd probably still like somebody better in those situations, but he does some decent things. Um, but that's not a backup center. And then you have like, I guess your smaller five, your small five. I think you saw Lyles at the five a couple of games ago. And again, that's a situational, like really, really tiny lineup type of thing. But without Holmes, it's just like Holmes doesn't really have a specialty, it looks like. Again, it's just like he's a non factor on both ends of the floor. And it's if he's not going to be the backup center and it's going to be kind of a backup center by committee, and he doesn't even have kind of like that situation or that kind of like that specialty maybe, it's just like that's very, very disappointing. And again, it's like what's going on there? But he's been one of the worst players on the team this year, and just as big of a disappointment as Barnes, if not more. Um, it's been kind of ridiculous because again, like in that Orlando game, it's like whenever he's out there, and he was only out there I think for a short stint before they just started giving backup 5 minutes to Metu. Um, you know, Holmes is just not doing anything, and again, he just looks disengaged and indecisive and not his energetic self. I mean, he has his moments, but for the most part, it's just nothing. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh man, I thought it was gonna be good. Like I think you asked me a question earlier this year. It's like who's someone who's gonna do better than expectations, and I'm like, yeah, it's Holmes. But man, no, he's underperforming those already kind of lower expectations. Um, oh, man, it's just annoying. Just with Barnes, he just looks lost out there. And like you said, like why should he be out there? Like what is he doing? Man, he just looks lost. And when he's on the court, he's playing like he doesn't want to be out there at times. I think maybe he doesn't. But it's like kind of like Barnes. It's going to be really hard to trade him. Like I think Holmes, you have to already start looking into trades for him because he does not want to be playing that 6-man role or that off the bench role. You can just tell. It's I think he's just pissed, honestly. It's like, you know what? I signed a contract to stay in SAC, to be the starter, but now he's getting paid like a starter. And who's going to want a guy making 12 million a year playing like Richaun Holmes? So now I feel like we're just stuck with him, and hopefully he can turn it around. But I have less faith in that than I do for Barnes, just because I just think he looks disinterested. Uh, man, Holmes
I mean,
just
whether it's disinterest, dissatisfaction, or whether it's some whatever effects of off court stuff, or a combination of all that, which it could be, um, you know, it does create an issue where you're not going to be able to trade Holmes. Now, luckily, the thing with Holmes is being a center. Some teams might get desperate. Now the price tag makes it very difficult, and so it's hard to envision him getting moved. But it's just like, again, it's like, okay, well, with Barnes, you can have Barnes be like out on the floor, and he's not necessarily not gonna be like a gaping wound, I guess, not like as much. But it's just like Holmes out there playing the center. It's just like, I don't know, like you don't really have anything in the pick and roll, it looks like. And he doesn't do anything in defending the pick and roll. He doesn't do anything in defending the paint. He doesn't do anything in really anything. Can't switch on to guys. It's super ineffective. But again, like maybe somebody gets really desperate just because they need a big guy. They need a five. A couple injuries happen. I don't know. But I don't know what it is. But it's, I don't know. I guess you could totally come to the conclusion that he just doesn't. I mean, he's not playing like himself. He's not playing with the enthusiasm that he always plays with. So
yeah.
it is kind of reasonable to be like, well, maybe that enthusiasm is not there.
I think that's the worst part for me is that he's not playing like how he did the last couple seasons. Um, because he was that guy who brought that energy, played every second with all, like, with his whole heart, and that's something you like really appreciated about Holmes. And yeah, he wasn't the biggest guy and or the most athletic, but he played with a certain energy where it's like, okay, like this is like our guy. Like he's, I don't know, he was good. That's what made him special, right? And
Mhm.
he just doesn't play with that whatsoever now. His push shot, I mean, I saw him take one the other day, and he bricked it. Like, oh god, I know he's not taking them at the same rate he was last year, but it was pretty bad.
Mhm.
I think he's really missing Halliburton on top of being dissatisfied of being moved to the bench. I think he misses Halliburton because that two man game between Tyrese and Rashawn was really good. Got a lot of alley oops from it. It was pretty good. It was lethal.
But
So yeah,
here's the thing. Just to add to the point of maybe he's really not interested playing here. It's not like there's nobody that's going to throw you an alley oop. I mean, Malik Monk threw him an alley oop in preseason, I think once or twice.
yeah,
Seemed
that's
like they were
true.
building a good rapport. Terrence Davis runs the pick and roll. You could probably get a few from him. Davion Mitchell. I mean, like, obviously, I'm not saying maybe Halliburton is a very special facilitator. Um, and none of those guys are quite as good as him, obviously, at that. But it's not like you don't have people there to do it. Um, I mean, that's what you want from Holmes. I mean, if you're going to have him out there as the five, he's not going to be a stretch big. He's not going to facilitate like Domas. You want him in that pick and roll, get those alley oops that in capitalize on that energy factor. And at the end of the day, it's just he's playing it's low energy Rashawn right now, and it's in a similar magnitude to Barnes. It's hurting this team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it's just like, again, and we said this last week. It's like we come into the season and it's like, okay, the Kings have some really good shooting guards. They have a couple of good, they have what should or could be a all-star in Fox and an up-and-coming great defender in Davion Mitchell. It's like, okay, they're really good at the guard position. They added Keegan Murray. We thought they had Harrison Barnes being the steady force that he'd be. Even that is kind of like the forward position is pretty decent, but it's just that center position. Two starter worthy players, an experienced backup at the third position in this on the center depth chart, basically. What could go wrong? And it just seems like everything has gone wrong, and it just starts with Holmes. And again, it's like not only is he not fulfilling the role of being a potential six man. Uh, I mean, there were a lot of people that were like, this guy could be a six man of the year candidate, and I thought, why not? I mean, if starter worthy talent coming off the bench, why the hell not? I mean, he'd have to really be doing a lot to do that. But not only to not be able to fulfill the backup center role, but to not even really have like a benefit. It's like I laid out. It's like you can see instances. I mean, as slight as they come up, for where Lynn is maybe useful. You can see instances as you've seen against the Warriors, where Metu's useful. Going really smaller, that can be useful. But having Holmes out there at the five, it's hard to come up with a lot of pros for him being out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. It's
But
it's funny because you asked me a question a couple weeks ago as well. You're like, what does Chimezi Metu do for this team? And it's like, at least I can point to something for him now. Like, he can play the small ball five and be effective. But it's like, now ask me that question about Holmes. I don't know. Doesn't even play now and eats up $12 million in cap space.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
and Metu's looked really like solid in his minutes. There's been a couple of times where I mean, like when he gets the ball, I think he's getting a little bit better with the offense. He's getting a little bit more decisive in kind of connecting with guys on passes and whatnot. But again, defensively, he's just good enough. He's not great at switching. It's not like he's gonna. Again, like we said last week, I would much rather have. I still think you'd solve all these issues if somehow you could have moved Holmes and retained Damian Jones. But Chimezi Metu is decent enough as a cheap option at doing that. And you know, I he kind of gotten a little better, and there's still moments where it just seems like offensively though he'll just kind of like kind of stand up at the top of the key and be like, "You need a pick? Anybody need a pick?" It's just like, I mean, he's just kind of standing there, which I guess is like that's what Holmes does or whatnot. I mean, but you saw Metu get an alley oop, I think from Monk in the second half against the Warriors, and it's just like there's things he's building off things, and he just whether that's it's not like Mike Brown has. I mean, Mike Brown obviously has a lot of faith in Chimezi Metu, but he has a lot of faith in Richaun Holmes too. Richaun Holmes was at Mike Brown's introductory press conference, and that was kind of a sign to a lot of people that Holmes was going to be on this team, and that part of the reason he was going to be on this team, or a big reason he was going to be there, was that Mike Brown liked him. Mike Brown saw the potential that he could, work with on the defensive end, and it just hasn't worked out. And Chimezi Metu's getting better with the same amount of trust that Richaun Holmes has under him, and Richaun Holmes has just done nothing. And I don't know. There's like, it's just there's hard to point out a stretch of time where Richaun Holmes played really well. I mean, he had like 15 points in one game, but even in that game, it's like, what do you like? I think he got a couple of dump offs or whatever. I mean, I don't want to take away from it from a solid offensive night production wise, but it's just I don't know. It's hard to point to anything good, and dang, you'd really like to be able to say differently.